All right. Well, thanks, everybody. First of all, let me just very briefly say that it is incredibly humbling to be accepted to come speak internationally. Slightly terrifying as well. So if I mess this up, it is going to be a long flight home. Thank you for coming to Hacking Mobile Apps with Frida. The alternate title was Hacking Mobile Apps with Frida, and the other tools that are based on Frida, which don't always tell you about it or advertise it. Very briefly about me, right now I am currently the application pen test lead for Allstate Insurance. As you might imagine, we're a very large company. We have a lot of applications, so I see a lot of corporate style applications. Before that, I was an application security consultant for a small consulting firm, going through many, many different customers, many different types of applications. So I've worked on everything from the latest modern Golang back to Access 2000 databases. Before that, I was a DoD security engineer doing kind of blue team type stuff. And kind of cut my teeth as a programmer, went through the programming world and sort of what we now call DevOps. So writing the code, deploying it to the servers, hardening the servers, and whatnot. So why am I the person to talk today about hacking mobile apps with Frida? Because one thing I'm not is some kind of reverse engineering wizard. I struggle through things, and this is an introductory level class. So if you have experience already doing reverse engineering with Frida, you're probably going to be a little bit bored, but tough, sit it out. So I like to teach the new people that I work with the stumbling blocks that I went through, the things that I broke and where I failed, so you can avoid those as you kind of start your journey with reverse engineering this way. So half of you right now are thinking this. So what does this come down to? Hands up if you have a flip phone. None. All right. Hands up if you have one of those little tiny prison phones that we've all been hearing about. I'm not a cop. No one? Okay. So we have apps, right? Hands up if you have 0 apps on your phone. No one. So we want to see what they do. We want to test them. Sometimes it's for work. Sometimes it's for fun. Sometimes you just want to learn so that maybe you can get some work later. Sometimes you're just bored. So everybody always kind of naturally flows towards the same first area because it's something that we're a little bit more comfortable with. Traffic analysis. So obviously the most popular interception proxy is Burp, at least where I come from. You guys have some weird stuff going on over here. So everybody goes towards Burp because you can test the APIs, you can test the calls and see what the application is doing outside of the device. And that's where most of the app is going to get its functionality anyway. For normal apps that are business apps and games and things like that, they all have to call back to servers. None of them, almost no apps survive on their own anymore, even if it's just used for tracking and advertising. And, there was a great talk earlier about privacy invasion. Even those apps send everything out over the device, over the internet. The next thing that usually follows, especially if you're doing this for like a mobile application pen testing job, is configuration analysis. And this is really just ticking all the boxes, making sure that the build properties are set, making sure that the environment properties were set, and kind of going through the motions to get some of the basic security things like backgrounding images so you don't leak privacy information. Very straightforward. And then the next of the big 3 that everybody flows to is static analysis. All right. And so this almost always means that you're doing this for your job, and you probably have source code. There are very few people that take the time to go through downloading and extracting the application and reverse engineering it, because that takes an incredibly long time and is incredibly expensive in man hours and labor hours. So most people stop there and you're donezo. So walk away. But everybody in this room understands that there is a lot of dirty stuff going inside a lot of these applications. And whether it's only mildly dirty, like tracking you for advertising purposes, or whether it's privacy violations like we saw in the other talk earlier, or whether it can be, Android malware, iOS malware we don't really see. It's allegedly out there. So this is where a reverse engineering approach like Frida can come in really handy. What exactly is Frida? It is, by definition, an open source dynamic instrumentation framework. So it's not really a debugger. It's not really dynamic analysis. It's kind of both of those a little bit from each side rolled into one. So what you're actually doing is injecting into the running process and hooking methods and hooking the native calls and altering the way that the code runs in memory. And so it's very ephemeral. You don't save anything back to the binary. You can patch it should you decide to go that route, but that's not what I've seen most people do. It's extremely cross-platform. And some of the typical things that we do with it, right back to extracting the applications, like what is the number one blocker for doing static analysis on an iOS application that you don't own? It's encrypted until it's running on the device, right? And so you have to have a method of performing the decryption, which is usually signed with not your certificate, and bring that off and decompiling it using Binary Ninja or something like that, and maybe IDA if you're rich, or you're doing this for work. And another big thing that we can do is bypassing SSL certificate pinning. And this is something that I'm starting to see a lot as a pen tester. People are finally getting caught up with SSL pinning and understanding that it can be a significant advantage for people who are doing surface level attacks against your apps and your APIs. It's not going to stop anyone dedicated. It's not going to stop the APTs, but defense in depth. So how does Frida work? It's got a client and a server. The server runs on the target device, and I'll cover the different types of target devices in just a minute. But so it runs as a service and opens up a TCP port, which is just a weird high port 27042, and sits there and listens for commands. And so it's got a couple different modes of operation. Depending on your objectives, depending on how stealthy you want to be, if you're doing hardcore reverse engineering of a very popular game or an app that makes a lot of money, then they're going to have reverse engineering obfuscation. They're going to have lots of different techniques, different crypto techniques to try and stop people from doing exactly what we want to do. So the first method is called interceptor. And so what this does is it injects a trampoline into the assembly to send the execution flow over somewhere else, right? Over to somewhere that we control. And so once we can get to this location in memory that we can control, we can obviously do whatever we want. Now, some of you are thinking, but what about ASLR? So this is the post-ASLR process. Once the application is already running, and Frida can just jump in and find the base address, and then we can find offsets from there and work towards finding the modules and the methods and classes that we want to attack. So interceptor is very sturdy. It works very well. It's not stealthy, and it's harder to hide if they've done a good job of obfuscation and reverse engineering protection. So the other method is called stalker. So what this does is it takes a copy of the assembly running in memory and makes one that's not quite the same, right? You can look at it and you're just like, no. And so it can really only get to a certain point in memory or a certain point in the assembly before it gets to a jump or some kind of instruction that it's just not going to work if it copies. So it can only work in smaller blocks. So this is much more stealthy. We can follow methods that are running, and there are methods of going and seeing what gets called next. And so you can work your way down the call stack. So it's sort of like a smarter Java stack trace if you're used to seeing something like that. You can work in forwards time and get the method calls. And so it's also much more fragile, right? Copying assembly and trying to execute it alongside other assembly that's running is hard, to say the least. So we're going to run through what it's like to get the workstation up and running to do the testing. So the first part is the Frida client side. So you have some kind of workstation, and it really doesn't matter what operating system you're running on. First thing you need is Python. And if you take away one thing from this talk, the most critical thing to learn is that you have to have virtual environment running. If you don't have virtual environment running, you're going to hate life after about 3 hours, because all of the different tools use different versions of dependencies. They use different libraries, and Frida is constantly putting out new versions. The jailbreaks have new versions, the Android roots have new versions, and everything, all of these end up with spaghetti code that breaks very quickly. And so it's much easier to just blow away your virtual environment and start over. So once you have that up and running, you can just pip install Frida and Frida tools. The Frida tools give you the command line tools. Frida itself gives you the core. So if you want to do the command line tools that I'll show in a little bit, you want to do those separately. And if you're doing Android, you have to have Android Studio, because that gives you the ADB bridge, right? And that gives you a lot of commands that you can use to control the device. And if you're going to do iOS, you have to have Xcode, and they separated the CLI tools now, so you have to actually go out to their developer site, download the CLI tools separately, because that's courage. So the target device can be any one of these. And I know I hadn't heard of QNX in a long time. BlackBerry bought them. Yes, BlackBerry. And so now they're partnering with QNX and doing something. But Frida runs on it. So any of those devices can run the Frida server side, right? And so a lot of demos you'll find on YouTube and stuff like that, people always fall back to debugging like a Linux application that they wrote in C real quick, because it's simple to show the source code and then simple to show how Frida can do the modification. And so it's very powerful on any OS. So to get an Android phone set up, I'm going to assume that you're using a rooted phone, because the Android environment is a little bit more friendly as far as getting devices that are rooted. If you need recommendations, I can give you an Amazon site that sells unlocked pixels. And you basically just go out to GitHub and find the Frida server for your architecture. So you gotta, there's a Droid info app. You run that and it'll tell you what instruction set you're running for your CPU, if you're using ARM or ARM64 or some kind of weird x86. So you gotta have the right architecture. And then you use ADB push to push that binary up into a location that you can control. And once you have everything set up, you can just do shell chmod and shell to run it. But personally, I like to just ADB shell into the device, and it's just like you're on the terminal there. You can just SU and CD to that directory, and then I'll run it locally so that I can see if there's any crashes or any log output, stuff like that, because there are many, many times where something is just not working, and you figure out that, oh, my phone rebooted, so I forgot to restart the server, or just crashed. Lots of different things. This is very rapid testing. Depending on the versions, if different versions aren't working for you, you delete it, download the older version maybe, and try again with a different version. With iOS, it's a little trickier. On a jailbroken iOS device, you're probably using Cydia. I think that's how it's pronounced. Apt is another option, but fewer people are using that. And then you just add the package source and install whatever's the latest. Now, the guy who creates Frida is very quick with uploading the new version to the Cydia package source, but it's not as fast as the GitHub repo. So, just in the month prior to creating this talk, I probably went through 8 different versions of Frida, and they're minor revisions, but they're bug fixes, and maybe that bug fixed the thing that I'm trying to do right now, so of course I'm going to test it, I'm going to try it out, and I've got to wait a little while to do it on my iPhones. Now, a lot of people ask about not jailbroken iPhones, because to be completely honest, jailbreaking iPhones right now is miserable. I held on to my 6 for 6 months before the jailbreak was released. Just watching Twitter and the jailbreak community is extremely toxic, so I don't recommend it right now. So with a non-jailbroken iOS, all is not lost. We can still recompile the app and deploy the gadget, which is super easy. All you have to do is set up a developer account, set up your signing certificate, set up your deployment profile, create a project in Xcode, deploy that as an app to your iPhone so that you can accept the signing or the deployment profile onto your iPhone, and then recompile the app to include the Frida gadget. And then Frida will understand that this app can be used, right? And it's basically the same functionality. I haven't noticed any functionality difference. It's just a pain difference, right? It takes a long time to go through these. The first time I did it, it took me days just to get all these things right, because it's, first of all, you got to pay $100. I'm not sure how many pounds that is, to get your developer account for Apple, and you're going through all these things. And when you search for them on Google, it's from, 2014. So it takes a little more effort. So now we come to the part where you're ready to do stuff, right? You have your workstation set up and you have your target device set up. So just going to run you through some very basic operations to do basically a smoke test to make sure everything is working. Frida LS devices is just a wrapper around the ADB LS devices so that you can see if anything's talking. And it'll give you just a nice printed list of all the devices, including your workstation. Frida PS. PS is just like any Linux PS, so you can get the running processes. TAC U is for USB, and A is for all. And then you can do UAI to do all that were installed by you. I find myself doing these two many, many, many times, so that's why I wanted to include them, just to make sure things are working and the server's talking. The next basic thing is to test out the stalker. And so Frida Trace executes the stalker on your app. And so the I can't remember what that stands for right now, but the I is looking for the method that you want to capture. So right now, you're just saying, Frida Trace and show me everything that functions in my app. And so let's see if I can show that. I'll come back to it so that I don't interrupt the flow. So that's just tracing all of the running activity in that process. So if you've ever seen a Java stack trace, think of that like water falling as fast as possible down your screen. It's not helpful, but something's working. But then you can start to change that TAC-I into well-known functions. And, open, send, receive. Open is for files on the file system. Send and receive, obviously, for network communications. So if you're just starting to do reversing on some app and you want to start looking at what kind of network traffic it might have, and you haven't yet made the jump to putting it through burp, you can just see what's being sent and received. And then, generally, you get to the point in every reverse engineering talk where they're just like, okay, now just reverse the rest of it. So, unfortunately, it's very difficult to show reverse engineering in a 45-minute talk, but I'm going to try and do as much as we can from a beginner standpoint. Some not-so-basic operations once you're ready to really start feeling out the inside of an application. And I'm highlighting Android right now just because I see a lot more activity on that. Sitting on the message boards I'm going to show later, it's way more Android activity. So no pause is important, because when you start Frida up and it spawns an app, it's going to sit there and wait for 10 seconds for you to do something. and I'm still sipping coffee. So then it quits, and I don't understand why. So you have to put the no pause in unless you're loading a script right off the bat. So I do no pause on everything, and you just give it the target app, and it's in the weird reverse notation. We'll come back to that in a second, but that's just like every Java package ever. So at this point, we turned Frida on, and it has its own little terminal. It prints out the version number, and you're just sitting at a blinking terminal, right? And so I typically go here first because this will tell me what modules are loaded in that app. And so you're going to get a bunch of the Java and Google stuff that are in every app just to run. And then you're going to look through there and find the one that you guess is going to be for the app that you're actually trying to target. And it gives you a big XML style list. So I typically just select all, copy that out into Sublime, and start deleting things that I know I don't want to work through because it's a giant list. Once you find the name of a module, you just throw that in there, and that will tell you the running memory base address for that application right now. So that's what I said, where it's bypassed ASLR, and you can start working from there. So you spend a lot of time working with memory addresses and pointers when you're doing the reverse engineering through Frida. So write that down once it prints, and I'll show that in a little bit, assuming the demos work. So the next thing that you're generally going to want to get into is scripting with Frida. And this is where it really starts to get powerful. There are many public scripts that people have made that are useful, and they're super easy to run. So you can either have a JavaScript file, or it also has bindings for C# and Node, and I think even C. So you can call the Frida API directly from your code to do all of the functionality that Frida would do just by normally banging on the terminal. And so Frida has a code share. It's codeshare.frida.re, and all the links are at the end, so don't need to write that down. So people have pre-written a lot of scripts to help you, like SSL pinning bypass, extracting the iOS app from a running device. All these things exist. Now, the caveat is, again, we're back to different versions, different iOS versions, different Python versions. Frida only recently made the jump to Python 3. So I generally keep my own little repo of scripts that I have edited and I know are working on my system. But by now, once you get some of these scripts running, you're getting to the point where you're actually drawing the owl, right? It's starting to be built out into something where you can look into the inside of these applications and see the methods and the activities that are happening. And so this is good for exploration and kind of feeling things out and just learning, right? It's best to start this just at the terminal, because there's really a lot that goes on. Once you start looking at these scripts, and I'm going to show one now, whether this likes it or not. Once you start working with the scripts, it gets pretty busy pretty quickly. Right? And I, for one, don't love JavaScript. So this is an example of a script that is tiny. Right, so 125 lines of JavaScript, and this is the same functionality that the stalker can do with following who is next in the call stack. Now the difference is this is using interceptor, and so it is a little bit more effective. It's just not quite as plug and play, because you have to go through and make sure that the architecture is proper, make sure that the base address and the process are are actually functioning. And so this is about as small of a script as I could find, around 100 lines, and they get gigantic. And obviously, if you're working on an application that is a big moneymaker and they're trying to hide things, then you have to worry about multiple competing rounds of crypto that are trying to hide, different running methods, and just a lot of reverse engineering obfuscation. And I'm not even really talking about code obfuscation. This is just doing things in a way to block game cheating, right? One of the guys on the Slack on the show is really big into hacking Clash of Clans, right? But they make a lot of money. They have a lot of money to hide this stuff. And so he releases scripts that are not really public. He'll show parts of what he does, but obviously people spend so much time doing this that not everybody wants to release the stuff publicly. So it can be fun trying to figure it out. So this is the Frida terminal. All right, so we're looking at Candy Crush, okay? So when I do this, it actually spawns on the device, right? So this is live. Not anymore. You know why? Because the phone died on the walk up here. So watch this. So ADB shell, that puts me into a shell on the device over the USB. SU is root. So once you root an Android device, you have to use Super SU. It's a little app, and that grants you permissions to take over root. So even though the phone might have been unlocked and rooted, you're not actively running as root until you super sue. And then boom. So now I know the server's running. It's very low on verbosity, so there's not a lot of output. I've talked to, I can never pronounce his name, but I've talked to the guy who created it, and you can go in there and edit the code to increase the logging levels. I might do a PR for that to add a switch, because right now it's a little bit painful when you're trying to learn it. So Frida server is running now. So VE activate is just a little bash function that gets me into my virtual environment sandbox, right? So tell me if I spell anything wrong. Oops. You were supposed to tell me. So now it's spawned and it's live, right? And so that was kind of a lot to get to this point when you're doing it for the first time, right? It does get a little bit frustrating, but once you get here, you can get some. It can be pretty fun once you see things that are actually running. I'm going to take this back over here. And I'm just cut and paste this right now because it's easy. So easy. There we go. All right, so Frida's got this nice command completion on the terminal. Right, so, you can just go down here and basically just play with all of these to try and figure out what they do. So, enumerate modules synchronous is a function. Most of these are functions, so you have to go out and look at the API notes and the spec and see what types of parameters it is expecting, right? And so this gives you this big nasty XML list. You go through here and oh man, there we go. And because it's a string, you code it. Oh. You guys didn't tell me again. Yay. So after all that, we have the base address of the running application on the mobile device. So pretty laborious to get to this point. Now, as a pen tester, or as anyone who wants to do this professionally, you kind of have to go through all the basics just to get to here. But there are other people who have gone before you that have done all of this work. And maybe I can show you. I'm just going to leave that up there for a while. Right. So how do we speed this up? Okay, we don't want to have to redo that every time we look at a new app, right? So there are multiple apps and scripts out there right now for speeding up your testing, right? One of my favorites is FiOS for iOS. The only problem is, like many open source projects, this guy did it as a college thesis project and then disappeared off the planet. Frick is the guy who does the Clash of Clans reverse engineering, right? So he has put a ton of time into tying Frida into an actual debugging framework. And so if you want to debug while you're doing the reverse engineering, so you have a little bit more intrusive but a little bit more active results when you're doing the testing, Frick is great, and it's very quick to set up. So you install these apps and everything comes preset for you. So they're all on GitHub. All the links are included. R2 Frida, Radare is the reverse engineering tool that's extremely powerful. And of all of these, I would say R2 Frida is probably the most powerful, but the highest learning curve. Objection, I have another quick demo to show after this. Objection is similar to Frick and FiOS, except it's all command line. FiOS is very pretty. It's a GUI, and it's nice to look at, but it doesn't work on my iPhone anymore because I upgraded, so I'm just out of luck. Appmon is another one like FiOS where it's very powerful, and if you have an iPhone 6 or 5, it's probably going to work. Actually, probably not a 6, because if you've upgraded your 6 to iOS like the latest one, then it's not going to work. I'm on 11.3.1, so if you're using the Electra jailbreak with the 6, it won't work. You got to have a 5 and older on 10.2, and there's all these stupid rules. So I'm going to mirror my screen so that I can see this better while I show this off. I think that's going to make everybody's life a little better. So the notation's a little bit different here. And objection can do the same thing with Android apps. And it's highlighted a little bit more with Android as far as using it on a non-rooted device, right? And so you can go out and recompile the app, and they have their TAC-G, which they call their gadget. And so that lets you use non-rooted, non-jailbroken devices. With this one, you have to make sure that the app is already running. Right, and so again, we get a nice, pretty command completion. And this is very simple and much faster to start poking around through the application and seeing what you want to see. If you don't know, the activities are kind of all the screens that'll run in a mobile app, and then you can just start looking through here. Classes are going to be the actual source classes that are resident in memory. So again, most of them are going to be the Java Google stuff that's required for every Android app, depending on what that app is using. But you can go through this and slowly there we go. Find the stuff that you're looking for. Right? And again, I just highlight this, copy and paste it out into Sublime, and start hitting them one at a time until I see what I'm actually looking for. And so I know from doing this that this class exists, right? And so I don't want to list it though. I want to watch it. Right? And so one of the things that objection will do for us is nothing. One of the things that objection will do for us is it will actually set up jobs that can run concurrently. So I can set multiple class methods, multiple functions that I want to watch. So what this awesome demo is supposed to do is I'll set up a watcher on the touch events, right? So Candy Crush, you're sitting there swiping over and over again, flicking. And so I'll set up a watcher for the touch events so that I know to start following things, I can get that output. Oh, I know why. No, that's not why. So, yeah, so that's terrible. Just getting my slide set back up here. Chrome. That's right. So, sad on the demo. Obviously, I didn't create any of this. I wouldn't be here without, as they say, standing on the shoulders of giants. So some of the resources that I really need to highlight, this guy, I can't pronounce his name, is the creator of Frida, and he does a ton of coding work all the time. He's absolutely brilliant. There are several resources you can go to, and I encourage you to go out and start getting into this. Frida on Telegram is sort of helpful. I'm not a big Telegram user, but it's okay. Frida on Freenode is basically the same thing. So the secret Slack has a lot of people on there that are kind of going through the same process, and a few people who are the real reverse engineering wizards, including the Clash of Clans guy. So I spend some time in there, and I encourage you to go out and... iDevice Pwn is more for jailbreaking, and it's a low volume, but I typically will see things about jailbreaking in there before I see it on Twitter, so it's very fast. This is an actual interaction I've had. So obviously it's kind of like IRC in the 90s. Your mileage may vary. So feel free to come out and say hello. And please ask me some questions to get past that terrible demo. Maybe it crashed. I'm not sure, honestly. But you're right. Typically I have to have the whole kind of all the plates spinning at the same time, and then I can spawn it. That's been my biggest problem over the past month, is apps spawning and then dying. So yes. Well, my Slack, that one, yeah, that one's already there. Yeah, you have to go to that website for an invite. But there's tons of tutorials out there. Oh, my slides. Yes. Yep. So I'm trying a new slide app called Reveal, which gives me nice transitions, but I have to export a PDF. So, and it's all written in JavaScript, which is terrible. Yeah, it was not a good choice. Yeah.
Keep your slides.
Yeah.
We'll have the videos up hopefully soonish, so that no one shouts at me.
Yeah.
So within a month or so, we should have the video.
So yeah, I have a bunch of interesting links in there. Like I said, the biggest thing to remember to take away is virtual environment, and then there's 100 different repos on GitHub that have lots of little scripts for testing through this. And thank you.